Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Ask Anything presented by Mosher Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Mosher's Director of Personnel. We're glad you're with us for this episode of Ask Anything, and with us today are two of our own. Joining me today are Megan Saylor and Doug Beers from Mosher's Learning Services Department, who will be talking to us about learning management systems. Megan is a senior consultant and engagement manager at Mosher Consulting and has been with the company for 10 years. Her main focus has been in middleware as an LMS systems owner. Megan is a senior consultant and engagement manager at Mosher Consulting and has been with the company for 10 years. Her main focus has been in middleware as an LMS systems owner. She has been an engagement manager for over 3 years, and she is also currently an administrator of Mosher's own LMS called HR Learn for both internal use and future client engagements. She is certified in BBST Foundations of Software Testing, IC Agile, Foundations of DevOps, Scaled Agile, Safe Agilist, Learn Server Administration for Blackboard, and presenting powerful presentations. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her son, Liam, her second rescue pig, Bomsey. I so much want to ask many questions about Bomsey, and relaxing or trying to in the yoga studio. Doug is a senior consultant for the Learning Services Division here at Mosher as well and has been with the company for 9+ years. He is looking forward to expanding the learning and services impact in Mosher and to our clients through implementing learning management systems and content management. He is certified in Scaled Agile, Certified Safe Agilist, BBST Foundations of Software Testing, and IC Agile, ICP Foundations of DevOps. In his free time, he enjoys hiking, playing video games, me too, and reading as well. Guys, it's great to have you with us on Ask You Anything to talk about learning management systems, or LMS for short. I found that LMS are great tools and they can serve many purposes, but are mainly used for learning and training in general. And we're going to dive into this in just a second. But tell me, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Great.
Good, thanks.
Well, before we get into LMSs, Megan, I have to ask, how's Bomsey?
He's good. He's really good. Yeah, he's the second rescue pig, and he probably weighs about 150 pounds. But believe it or not, he is an indoor pet, and he's probably, as I've told many other coworkers here at Moser, cleaner than most dogs. So that surprises people, but he's great, and he's very smart and quite clean.
He's box trained, right?
Yeah. No, actually, he has a pig door, just like a dog door.
Okay.
And he
What?
goes outside. He lets himself out when he needs to go potty, and they're very particular about their space. So he has his little corner, and I'll leave it at that. But it's convenient.
Yeah, we've talked before. My sister has a Vietnamese pot-bellied pig that she got as a rescue from a family. He is outdoor. His name is Sheriff. Shout out to him if he's listening.
Oh,
The radio in his enclosure.
Yeah.
I don't think it's Wi-Fi compatible, but just in case, I don't want to offend him. But yeah, and I have friends who have 2 indoor pigs as well. But
okay.
there's our outdoor and box trained, just depending. With winter, they avail themselves of the box more than going outside.
Yes, they are very sensitive creatures. And Bamsey, I always tell people he's a little bit of a diva. Doesn't like to get his hooves cold, wet, any of that. So he'll hold it if he has to, but he does not like yucky weather.
Great. It's a great life. Doug, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Well, I'm glad to have you both here to talk about LMSs. So let's start with the basics. What is an LMS and what can it do?
So Doug, I'll take this brief intro if you want, and you can add anything else that's important. So an LMS at the very basic level is a learning management system. And typically these days, a web-hosted application, most of the LMSs at this point are in the cloud. And most companies that are using them sort of use this software as a service solution. So the vendor will host the LMS, and then they've got their own sort of private interface that they can configure in the way that they need to use it. So you can develop your training in an LMS, you can deliver your training in that LMS to your end users. And then one of the most important parts is being able to track what your users are doing with that training, look at things like scores or certifications and all of those kind of things. So most LMS are quite robust in their ability to provide end users with, a really great way to take self-paced training, probably one of the biggest things, and then go and run reports to see how everybody's doing.
Yeah, there's companies can use them a whole different types of ways, but what we've seen really is, the hosted in the cloud. A lot of companies are going away from self-hosted or privately hosted. As far as companies actually offering LMSs, there are some freeware out there and some things you can implement yourself. But if you're doing it as software as a service, it's really going to be in the cloud, as Megan mentioned. And really, you really want to think about when you're looking at LMSs, what type of LMS is going to be good for me, what fits me. There's whole different types out there. So just keeping that in mind and what your business needs are is going to be important going forward.
Yeah, I remember I started in HR 22 years ago, and I remember my organization back then hosting their own LMS. And I'm not going to lie, it was a mess. For a lack of a better term, the LMS was a mess because everything was hosted in-house and there was just no cohesiveness, if you will. I mean, I'm trying to think back, but there was just no way of developing the things that we can do today. Obviously, I'm sure the cloud helps. I'm sure the development of these software has definitely gotten a lot better in the years since. And I've been a part of many places where we've had external LMSs that are in the cloud and that you can, move things around, tailor it more towards what you really need instead of just having a one size fits all cookie cutter box LMS.
For sure. I think you hit on a couple of points. Two of the biggest things that I think, Doug, I won't speak for you, but in general, Doug and I working together over these last 14 years with LMS have been one, I think you mentioned things sort of being a hot mess in an LMS.
Mm-hmm.
Not always very organized. Things can get out of control pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, especially if companies have a lot of users and a lot of different training options in their LMS. If there's not organization from the get-go, it will run amok quickly. And then the other thing is the growth of a lot of these LMS platforms over the years. I remember probably about 14 years ago when I first started working with an LMS, it was called Plateau, and they have gone through some changes since then. They're now called SAP, but very sort of outdated, not very pretty for end users to look at. And we've seen that with a lot of LMS over the year. Now there are so many more options and so many more companies that have developed these LMS platforms and offer them, that there are all kinds of different LMS you can get, and the customizations that any organization could take and implement into how they want things to look, branding and things of that nature, have really improved over the years. So I know LMS in general has really become sort of a hot topic for a lot of organizations in the educational space, in the government space, and private organizations. A lot of companies are picking up LMS to use to train, onboard, and then continuing education, and also ensuring that users are trained on must-have training. So there's a lot of organizations. People used to think of LMS in just sort of like colleges or K through 12 spaces, but it certainly is not just for that.
Well, and you mentioned organization within the LMS from the get-go. And that was, I think, one of my biggest complaints back then, is just they gave you this box of stuff and you were just basically, okay, you're on your own. You want training for XYZ? Yeah, go ahead and search it in the box. And
right.
And if you weren't familiar with the software, with what you were getting, you were just lost. And so, yeah, that was my biggest complaint, was that here I was starting my career in HR and I was given this LMS that really I had no control over it because it was already set up and it had courses that we never shown to anybody because we didn't need to do it. We were a state government organization. And so we were left with probably 75% of courses within the LMS that we never even opened because that wasn't our thing, but because it was a cookie cutter thing, that was part of the package. And so we spent more time trying to arrange trainings and make sure that people had the right link, etc., that it was just a mess. But nowadays, it's very different.
Yeah, it is different. And Doug, maybe you can speak to this a bit. So we just worked on Moser's LMS called HR Learn. And one of the things that Doug and I sat down and talked about was how do we organize this? And of course, we worked with our other half of our team, Charity and Shauna. How do we organize this in a way that we start right and then it can expand, but it's still from the starting containers, even with all of the expansion, it still makes sense and it's easy for users to go and find what they need, or it's easy for us to push it out to them and make sure they have it, on the first day that they're hired. So Doug worked a lot on that in terms of categorizing these things and setting them up in the LMS. So Doug, if you want to talk a little bit about that organization part.
Yeah, like you were saying on how like back in the day, they pretty much kind of threw everything in there, kitchen sink, and you kind of were on your own trying to figure out where everything fit together and how to get to. Nowadays, especially with software as a service, they kind of broken that down into buckets, more manageable pieces. For example, the Higher Road, they have the LMS itself, but then in addition to that, you could have onboarding, or you can have HR type analytics as well. And a lot of companies are doing that now that offer the software as a service, where they kind of break everything up and only get what you want out of that. So like what we did for the implementation of the Moser LMS is we only really needed it for the learning part. But when we looked into it, like you said, like nowadays the UI is a lot cleaner. It's a lot better to navigate. As a user, you kind of just go in there and it's pretty self-explanatory. And that's what we're kind of looking for there, ease of use. In addition to some, automated functionality. What we're trying to do is, as a learner, you kind of just want to know, especially with compliance training, as Megan mentioned, you kind of just want to know when you have to take training and get in there and not have to worry about trying to find something, or making sure that you know when it's due and everything along those lines. So automating emails saying, hey, you have this training coming up and here's how you log in and here's your information and here's what the course is and it's already assigned to you and you have these many days to take it. Just making it easier for the user to get in there, take their training and get out. Because obviously if it's just compliance training or something that's, not overly exciting, they don't want to spend all day in there trying to fuck around and find out how to take it or what's going on. So especially those use cases where it's setting with compliance training or, that kind of training, you definitely want to kind of get them in there and out and move them along your day, because they're also have other work to do. So that's what we are shooting for, at least at the beginning.
Just to move on real quickly, and you guys have touched on this really, but nowadays you can put a ton of learning into an LMS. So can you tell us what type of learning can an LMS support?
Yeah, I said earlier, like your basic training historically was you go to a classroom, you have an instructor, you sit down, you take a course, and that's pretty much it. Nowadays, especially, with the pandemic just happened and really a push towards online learning and remote working and everything that's involved. It's really moving towards online learning, or at least a blended learning experience where some people can take it in person if they want, or they can take it online, or a bit of both. It's really more flexible nowadays. So as far as the types of training, you could have like a Zoom meeting where everyone is remote and just going over like PDFs or PowerPoints or some non-interactive training and just have it that way. And you can have it through the LMS. Nowadays, a lot of the LMS systems integrate with Zoom or WebEx or other meeting software platforms where you could have that meeting, but also retain it within your LMS and have that data there that they attended, if they had any questions, discussion boards, surveys, reporting on all that thing, automation, letting you know, hey, this instructor-led training is going on when. So it's not only just for, taking self-paced training online and taking it whenever you want. You could just have in-person or online instructor-led training and still utilize the LMS very effectively and have that there so that it's reported on and, you don't have to worry about losing that information or data or getting it lost. That's something to consider.
So how can a company benefit from an LMS? I think we know the answer to this, but do we really know the answer to this?
I think, like I was mentioning earlier about, it's moving with remote work and online and everything involved with that. It's really moving where companies kind of really have to have some sort of learning application for their company, especially if it's you at least have a dozen or more employees. Some use cases where it's like, mom and pop shop where it might not apply to you when you only have a few people. But any place where you take training or have to record training, I mean, it's pretty important, I think, to have some sort of learning management system in place where everything is tracked. You can integrate with your HR platforms or have the HR platform in there itself. And it makes it a whole lot easier to set that up, utilize it, compliance tracking, any non-compliant self-paced work, if they want to take Red Hat Unix classes, that sort of thing, you could have it in an LMS tracked. Outside the LMS, you can track any other training they might take or certifications they have and add it to the LMS outside of that. And it's just a generally good tool to have in your repertoire as a company, just to have that there and utilize that going forward. I think is going to be really important the way things are shaping out in the industry.
Yeah, and just a couple additional things to add. Doug, you covered a lot of it, but some of the other benefits and having an LMS set up and ready for your end users, whoever they might be, you can train folks on the go. So a lot of companies will use like mobile platforms where if there was something important, that HR sends out or some type of compliance training that's got to be done quick, fast, and in a hurry, somebody could jump on their smartphone and take their training and it's still all recorded, right? So the company still has a record that you did it, whether it's on your computer or whether it's from your phone. And kind of going off of that point, any kind of, let's say, emergency compliance related training, or let's say the company, some sort of medical company, and they need to get information to users quick. It's got to be implemented tomorrow. The LMS allows the administrator to hurry up and get that information out there quickly, right? All it takes is a couple of clicks to create and deliver new or important or emergent information to their end users. That's another thing is that an LMS allows you to do these things quickly and in real time. And I guess maybe the last thing that I would just add is the LMS, especially with some of this more interactive training and the ability to get an achievement badge or a certification of some sort for users, is to motivate them to do the training, make it a little bit more exciting. If a company can use something like gamification, right? It's not just boring flipping through online pages or like it would be flipping through pages of a book. So motivating users to make the efforts to take the training, to educate themselves and keep that going. Continuous learning is a big deal. I know Moser offers all of their employees the opportunity to continue their education, whether it's using Moser's internal tools or going out and signing up for a course, with some vendor. And an LMS allows any kind of organization to offer that to their staff, and they can get on there on their own time, at their own pace, when they've got a chance and get through that training. So I think that's a huge benefit for any organization, educational or not, to just have that tool at their fingertips for their staff.
So you both mentioned a lot of pros of having an LMS, like mobile versatility. I mean, I totally get that one. That's something that I think many in many fields can actually take advantage of that. Many people who are not necessarily maybe tied into an office, but they're like salespeople who are out on the street, obviously medical personnel as well. You guys talked about the recording, the record keeping capabilities of an LMS. So some of those are some great pros. What are some of the cons of using an LMS, if there are any?
I think probably the biggest potential pitfall for an LMS is initial setup cost, right? So unless you're using some sort of open source LMS that you're going to install on your own servers and run that for yourself, and that's free, which is great, but you still have to pay the people who are going to sit there and implement things and configure things, right? So there's salary involved in that, having people who can set all of that up and then administer that LMS. Past that, of course, if you choose a vendor and they're going to host it for you, obviously that comes with a cost, whether it's a yearly cost or they go off the number of users that are going to be in there. There's a lot of different pricing plans with the LMS that are out there today. But usually those initial setup fees and or the initial work that's being done, got to pay somebody to do that. That's where the cost comes in. And I would say after it's initially set up, then it's more maintenance related. And for the folks who are going to get in there as admins and create and deliver the training and run the reports and those kind of things. So the cost initially is a bit heavier. And then as time goes on, the cost comes down. But I would say that's probably the biggest con of having an LMS. But when it's all said and done, especially if you employ that LMS for quite a few
Right.
years, obviously not hiring instructors, renting space, printing out papers, buying books, all of those things that come with traditional in-person learning type things, it balances itself out and then actually goes the other direction. So the LMS becomes very cost effective for continuous learning for your entire company. Yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest con. Doug, can you think of anything else?
Yeah, I mean, just the implementation process and trying to pick a LMS and implementing it really can be a real negative part as far as picking a wrong LMS or not understanding your own business needs or how they can translate to an LMS, and picking the wrong LMS or not getting it set up the way you want it to, missing features, that sort of thing could really hinder you and become a negative for the LMS process. We've had implementations where there's so many features that it seemed overwhelming at first. And I think part of that is just realizing what is needed from the business, how you could set it up, really go for, initial setup and maybe just aim for the basics at first. And then when you get people in there, you can get feedback of how the system is working, and you could add on to that and add nice to haves or any other features as you go forward. So instead of trying to do everything at once, you can just build upon it and add features over time or enable them over time. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just knowing what features you want, knowing how you want to use your LMS. If you want to use it for a corporate setting, you might not want something like Blackboard or something that's more higher education based, where it doesn't really, meet your needs one-on-one with a corporate setting. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at LMS, just trying to make sure that all the boxes are being checked off for your requirements and that your needs are met by the LMS as well.
Well, and to Megan's point, I think that con of that initial investment really does turn into a pro, like you were mentioning, Megan, in the end, because the return of investment will be at some point equal, and then it's going to be greater than, because you're going to move from your traditional classroom setting, paying an instructor to come in. You may still do that from time to time, depending on the subject matter,
Sure.
but it's definitely going to bring those costs down overall across the board. And to your point, Doug, the implementation piece, I can definitely see why that's a con, because it's a headache. As someone who's been through some of those, not just with LMSs, but with HRISs, you name it, any type of software, it's a headache, because you have to sit down as the implementation artist, if you will, and really come up with a solution for an organization. And then you have to sit down across the table with somebody that's thinking you're the expert. You tell me what I need, when in reality, it's them that have to tell you what they need, what the company needs are, which is everything that you were mentioning. So along those same lines, how can you effectively implement an LMS, and who can help?
You're spot on. So spot on with this. And this has been sort of Doug and I's approach to this
I've
over
lived
the
through it.
years.
I know.
Yeah. Understanding the business and the business need is the first priority in any of these things. I think in tackling any kind of LMS, whether you're just starting to pick it out and then want to move to an implementation, or let's say maybe you inherited one and it's already implemented, but it's a hot mess. And
Yep.
how do we fix it to meet the needs of whatever the organization is? So, and Doug and I sort of working together, we take a two-step approach, I think, or two-part approach, understanding the business and then helping the technology team, if you will, understand what it is we need them to do to meet the needs of the business. I feel like in general in IT, there's always a bit of a gap there. The business doesn't understand the tech part, and sometimes the tech folks don't understand the business part, and it's nobody's
Right.
fault. It's
Yeah.
just they are, living on two different sides of the world, and they're each focused in their sort of own lane. So bringing those two groups together and sort of filling that gap and making sure that the tech folks understand the business need and the business understands that the tech folks are not miracle workers. What we have in front of us, if it's as good as it's going to get, we're going to figure out which features you need and make sure that they work to meet your need the best that they can. But sometimes it doesn't always happen. So breaking down the business needs is most important. Are you in an educational space? Are you in a government space? Is compliance training part of your need? Whatever that is. And then sort of translate that into language that the tech folks understand and the things that they need to quote unquote turn on or turn
Right.
off or customize or whatnot, and just make sure that we're checking all the business boxes on the tech side of things. At the end of the day, if the LMS is meeting the business needs, fantastic. And if there's still some things that we have missing, then we'll go back and fill those in later. Like Doug said, especially if you're just new to an LMS in your organization, sometimes you just start with the basics. And then as time goes on, the business can say, hey, it would be really nice for us to have this custom report. We need this specific set of information and we don't have that right now. Can you make one for us? And then we could go back to the tech people and say, hey, we need a custom report. Can you code us up something nice? Here's the information that we need. And then they can put that together. We can go through testing and fix the business need. So I feel like that's typically the approach. And this is for anything. I'm sure it's the same thing for, your HR software that you use. It's just identifying that need and making sure that both sides, business and the tech sides, understand exactly what each other needs and making it happen.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, Megan, a lot of it's communication, and sometimes you feel like you're speaking two other languages, but sometimes you're actually speaking the same language and you don't know,
Right.
know that you are. And
Yeah.
a lot of times it's just semantics, like, oh, you're calling it something else than what I'm usually calling it. So a lot of it is just understanding each other and making sure we're speaking the same language, having a lot of meetings and making sure that we're on the same page, document requirements and all that, especially going forward, especially during the initial implementation phase. That's very important. But, as business needs, they're always changing. So it's not like once you implement it, you usually don't just leave it alone and let it go. For the most part, you're always constantly adding features or getting feedback from the user, having to add certain things or change things, turn things on or off, and that sort of thing. So it's constantly evolving. And yeah, communication is the key, even if it's not working out, and letting the customer know, hey, this isn't really maybe what you're looking for, and letting them know ahead of time to steer them in another direction, I think is also key. You don't want to find out several years and several $100,000 plus down the road that, hey, this wasn't really what the business needed or what they were intending, and finding out way too late. So communication is key, and during any implementation, and making sure that everyone is on the same page. Definitely.
Well, and I think the basic method that you explain about starting off with the bare bones basic, it's a great idea. I wish more places and software would do that to start, but not everybody listens, and everybody wants to, of course, wow you with their options and what the system can do. And then you find out a week into it that none of those things really work for you because,
Right.
oh, great, it's a great tool, but I don't need this. What I really need is this. And then it takes another week for you to get that back. And so I do like your idea about starting with the basics. I think that really is very important because then you know what you don't know. If you don't know that you need something and you yearn for it, then yes, then this is what I need. And so now you can start building up to scale what you really need. So I think that is very important. And this segues to my last questions. I want to get to this, but when you already have an LMS in place, this is something that I've dealt with when like you mentioned earlier, Megan, when I've been given this great gift of this LMS that I didn't start, I don't own, and now I have to deal with it because we have an XYZ contract. How can you use it to its full potential? I mean, what can you do at that point? I found out the hard way, but What can you tell our folks, our listeners? What can you do when you have an LMS and you're not really using it to its full potential?
We actually, Doug and I just had a conversation with a client on this, I don't know, probably 6, 7 months ago, right? Where they have an LMS, this beautiful gift, like you said, and we're not using all of these parts, right? There's a whole list.
Yeah.
But we need some of these other parts and we really don't have that, and we need to clean up and lots of different things. So I think in a situation like that where you've got this LMS in front of you already, and let's say it's populated with a bunch of users and a bunch of training, and you need to run some kind of cleanup, you need to make sure that you're using it for its true intention, you're getting your best bang for your buck out of it, is to grab up some experts, grab up some people who are very familiar with all different types of LMS and even all different types of training, and have them take a look at it. Whether it's internal to your company, or whether you need to branch out and look at an expert from another company, hire somebody to come in and break it down to its bare bones and really look at, from a business perspective, what do they truly need? And that could be, like we talked about earlier, just basics, or maybe they're already using a bunch of different parts. And so it's a little bit more broad than just the basics, but break it down to its bare bones, kind of list those things out and look at each of them in the LMS and streamline processes around using those pieces. It's not always that the problem is the LMS itself maybe isn't meeting the business need, or the training isn't meeting the business need. It's not always that. Sometimes you could go in there and kind of tear things down and look at how it's all set up and say, well, this is actually pretty good. We could do a little bit of cleanup, but the LMS and the training in the LMS, this looks great. What is going wrong with the business process of keeping the LMS and all of its content and all of its users up to date? What's going wrong there? And sometimes, actually, probably at least half the time, I think, Doug, you would agree, that's where we find holes in some of these LMS contracts that we've looked at. That's where we're finding the holes. It's in the process and the folks that are involved. It's in looking at those processes and trying to streamline things and sort of helping them to organize their work. The LMS might not always be sort of where the problem is. But I would say the other half of the time, maybe where the LMS is the problem, it's simply maybe not knowing that the LMS gives you all of these options. Maybe folks aren't using all the different sort of categories of, I don't know, I say categories, all the different little pieces that the LMS
Right.
is made up of. Maybe they're not using those. They don't know that the LMS can allow them to do this or do that, or send automated emails or remind people about training. Maybe they didn't realize that they could brand this page or that page or whatever it is. So getting in there and doing research on whatever LMS it is that they're using, and just helping people to understand that, making them aware that they've got all of these pieces that can be used if they're not using them. So I would just say getting somebody in there who can really research the business processes, research the details of the LMS down to the nitty-gritty even, and just helping that organization understand, maybe where some of their downfalls are and where the LMS can help pick up some of those pieces that they feel they're in need of. It can be very challenging because an LMS is already set up and a group of admins are in there already working in it. It's not
Yeah.
always easy to change, business processes and things of that nature. But if an organization is open to that and open to having just an outside pair of eyes come in and look at what could be improved, I would say a lot of these organizations can be really successful in using their LMS in a better way, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you see companies that have had an LMS for years and years, and they're pretty much using it the same way they had it initially. It's that initial implementation and maybe not continuously evolving and adding features on. And then you'll have, some companies that have it set up incorrectly for what they really need, or they have these business processes that were set up a certain way at the beginning and they never really evolved. And now over the years, there's better ways of doing it, and being aware of what features are available, what changes have been made, communicating to the business side, making sure that you're still following the business needs, but hey, maybe this process can be done better this way instead of doing this old way that seems outdated. So It's just going back to the business needs, the requirements, looking at them and maybe figuring out a better way of doing something and evolving from there, and not regressing and maybe scrapping the entire system because it's not working for you. Just maybe making some feature changes and that sort of thing could be all that a company might need to better leverage their LMS. Sometimes they just feel like this LMS isn't working for me, let's just get rid of it and go to a new one. Well, that's a pretty big task, going from one LMS system to another one, not
Yes.
only because it's a new application, but trying to fit what you had before into a new LMS. And it might have not even been the LMS's problem. It might have been your business needs were not being met. So
Right.
if you bring that over to the new LMS, you're going to still have the same problems. So just going back and making sure that everyone is aware of what is needed, and going from there and saying, oh, we can do it this way, would really, I think, take a deep breath and figure out how you want to do things first before making that sort of decision.
Well, there you have it. If you have an LMS, look for the experts. Talk to Megan, talk to Doug. They'll help you out. And with that, we'd like to thank Megan and Doug for joining us today, talking to us about LMSs. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Had a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything, presented by Motion Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Megan Saylor and Doug Beers talk to us about learning management systems. Join us next time when we continue to dive deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Remember to send us your ideas or topics via social media feeds. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, check out those LMSs. So long, everybody.